Heavy rainfall and loose sediment caused Hastings Creek to overflow on From Road in Lynn Valley. Residents were alarmed to find out the creek bed wasn't holding the excess rainfall. Late last night, the creek bed rose up into the trails behind Argyle High School, leaving behind all of this sediment here and in many people's homes, causing extensive damage.
The hallways and the classrooms were covered with water on one level, on the lower level. About 8 classrooms or so were affected. It also hit our music department, so that means the band and choir, of course, where there's a lot of instruments. So that we're hoping there's no damage because we moved them quickly enough, but we'll see in the next day or so.
Despite having the day off, many Argyle students were at the school to assess the damage.
The stream is still overflowing, so it looks like it's going to be interesting coming to school tomorrow. So none of the lockers were affected, so that's a good thing.
The creek flow is mostly contained. City and emergency response workers are now assessing how much damage has been done to the area. Residents have been told it's okay to return home, but cleanup is expected to take much longer. Laura Taylor in North Vancouver for BCIT Magazine. Protesters gathered outside Supreme Court to express outrage over Kinder Morgan's application for an injunction. Kim Fink-Genskin felt she had to come to voice the opinion of people that couldn't be there.
I'm here representing my children because my daughter actually said to me when she heard out about the trees that were cut down by Kinder Morgan as part of the survey work, "Mommy, what can I do?" So she and a bunch of her friends put together this banner, and since they're in school this morning, I said I would bring it down to the courthouse for them.
If Kinder Morgan gets an injunction, protesters will have to leave Burnaby Mountain and allow survey work to continue. A few protesters stayed behind to ensure no work went ahead while the case was being heard. They spent the morning poring over court documents to figure out what this will mean for them.
If there's an injunction, I assume that police would come and arrest us. And that's a consequence of the injunction, and it's something that some people are willing to do, some people are not. They have to sort of think about that and decide whether or not they're willing to be arrested.
Kinder Morgan is also claiming damages for the delays it says protesters have caused, to the tune of $5.6 million. The injunction hearing could end as early as next week. Laura Taylor in Vancouver for BCIT Magazine.
Could be better, could be worse.
Mark chooses to sleep on the street with his dog instead of sleeping inside a warm shelter. He says this tough reality is easier than feeling dehumanized by shelter rules.
But you aren't a human. You're a slave. You're like, you come in, you got to do what I say. I mean, yeah, it's safer in all that sense, but it's worse than jail.
Mark is not alone in feeling his individual needs can't be met in a shelter. It's estimated that around 2,700 people are homeless in Vancouver, and only a fraction either can or are willing to use high or low barrier shelters.
90% of the shelters I've ever been in, they just looked at you like you're all the same. Even though it's very clearly, if you spend a few seconds, you can tell the difference between the homeless people, but yet most of those places, they weren't properly trained and maybe overworked and overwhelmed. They couldn't cater to the different homeless people.
Adrian Smith, a homeless advocacy lawyer, says the barriers set up in shelters are impossible to manage for many people. The strict rules can alienate those with pets, families, transgender people, and people with mental health issues.
The lives of homeless people are often chaotic, and when that comes inside, it can be shocking. But I think it's also fairly infantilizing and quite insulting to suppose that people who are homeless now won't be able to have suitable housing and don't have the skills to maintain suitable housing. I think if we treat people like responsible adults, give them an opportunity to behave like that, they will. And there's no opportunity to do that in the shelter system.
One shelter, Union Gospel Mission, told us that they try to be as inclusive as they can, but some barriers are necessary to run a shelter. They say these rules help guide their counselors' limited attention to those people that are ready to transition into more permanent housing. Despite differing views on shelter rules, everyone interviewed agreed on one thing: more permanent housing, not shelters, is the only fix for the homeless crisis in Vancouver. Laura Taylor in Vancouver for BCIT Magazine.